Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 2, Episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Apple TV's Shrinking. As you can easily go back and see, I really enjoyed Season 1. I have full coverage of it here on the channel, and it made my top 10 for 2023, which is tough for a comedy to do unless it's a comedy in like the same way that The Bear is a comedy. But generally, your traditional comedies, pretty tough to make my top 10. This one brought to you by Bill Lawrence, the same guy who brought us Scrubs back in the early 2000s, and in present day has brought us Ted Lasso and Bad Monkey. Shrinking feels very much in the same vein as those shows. What I think really separates these shows from one another is how much you enjoy the talent that's involved. Like Scrubs relied heavily on Zach Braff and Donald Faison, how much you like them. Ted Lasso really relies on how much you enjoy Jason Sudeikis, and Bad Monkey leans heavily on how much you like Vince Vaughn. And this show can end up being my favorite of all of them if it continues in the direction it's trending, because these first 3 episodes were pretty solid. Flawed, they're not perfect, but solid. And what makes a Bill Lawrence show special is what it does outside of the comedy. The comedy's always going to be there. All of the aforementioned shows are funny in their own way. I don't think I or anyone else would dispute that. This show is not just funny, but I think actually stepping up the humor in this season. What makes Ted Lasso my still current favorite is how well it also did these moving and heartfelt moments, as well as Ted's overwhelming positivity in the face of so much negativity. I also think that the positivity was better received for Ted Lasso than it might normally have been due to it premiering during the pandemic when we all probably could have used something a little heartwarming. I know that show really connected with me by showcasing a guy who was so positive and so motivational during a time when, in this country, people were and still are behaving so shitty toward one another. And the reason I think Shrinking could resonate with me even more than Ted Lasso is kind of similar to that. Today, there's a big focus on mental health in this country. People are moving past these stigmas about going to therapy and working to improve on themselves. And we're also becoming more aware of who we are, why we're that way, and how our personalities impact our everyday lives. That's why I think introducing the character who killed Jimmy's wife is a masterstroke, and whoever came up with that, I certainly hope they got a raise. They set up the potential for some really emotional and like soul-crushing scenes that will stretch the acting ability of Jason Segel and Lukita Maxwell. She's who plays Alice. It'll stretch their acting to the limits, theoretically. And I'm making no claims as to whether or not they can pull it off. I'm just expecting a lot of really strong scenes of someone whose job it is to coach people through these exact moments, struggling to deal with it himself and trying to coach his daughter through it as well. Having Brett Goldstein, who plays Roy, I don't know, I'm gonna say played as if it's gone for sure, but who plays Roy on Ted Lasso, having him play the character, just icing on the cake. It's great to see Brett. Roy's character arc, Jamie's character arc, the relationship they have with one another, probably my favorite thing about Ted Lasso. So it's comforting to see a guy who I know can carry these moments that require so much emotional weight. And that are meant to be incredibly impactful to the audience as well. I just love the fact that this season is clearly going to deal with some really heavy shit, and I expect that it'll be relatable and comforting for a lot of people to see characters working through shit that they can relate to in their lives, like death, love, loss, trauma. We all can relate to that kind of stuff. Also, after watching the first 3 episodes, I was reminded of how strong of an overall cast this show has. Another similarity to Ted Lasso. And having said that, this feels like a good time to transition to talking about these characters and how they're going to propel this story with their various issues that they have to work through. At the same time, while this is a promising start, I do have a few issues that I'd like to discuss as well, but we'll get to that. Hey everybody, I just want to take a small break from this review to talk about the various other ways you can engage with me on other platforms. If you're so inclined, and I understand why you wouldn't, I am an acquired taste, but you can join the Patreon where you can get extra content like retro reviews, where I review old shows and movies to see if they still hold up today, Mike's Musings, where I talk about shows I'm watching that I don't cover on the channel, or Mike's VOD, where you can commission me to watch a show, which I will then review on the channel. And if you want to engage with me and chat with me more directly, I also implore you to join the Discord and follow the Facebook page. I set up channels in the Discord for all of us to discuss the shows I'm reviewing on the channel, and I also drop new videos in there since it's the easiest platform for me to share to from my phone. The Facebook can be really fun because I sort of live comment on shows I'm watching, often while under the influence, I'm not going to lie. And I'll also share news there, both about television and film and about myself as well. So if you like my content, you want to be more engaged, you think I'm charming, or you simply want to show support, feel free to sign up for the Patreon or join the Discord or Facebook today. Links to all platforms are in every video description. Remember to share all my shit to your respective social media platforms. And now back to this review. So this season opens by immediately kind of updating the audience on where these characters are mentally and what they're dealing with since the season 1 finale. So I'm going to kind of treat this video the same way. Grace, she was played by SNL's Heidi Gardner last year. She's now in prison following the attempted murder of her husband, Donnie, an attempt that she made after misinterpreting some advice from Jimmy. She, of course, incorrectly blames Jimmy for this, and he understandably, but also incorrectly, feels like complete and total shit over it, and he takes all this responsibility. Additionally, Sean is living with him, and they're having therapy sessions together. And don't worry, I'll tie this back to Grace and Jimmy in a second. And I'm going to talk about Sean a bit more later as well. But in the first therapy session that we see with them, Sean says he doesn't want to meet with an old friend that's from the military because this guy likes to relive those old days, and Sean doesn't want to deal with that kind of shit. And Jimmy says he can't run from his problems, and he tells Sean the story when he first arrived at the scene when his wife Tia died. And I like this scene. He paints a very vivid picture. He talks about still being able to see like steam coming off the car engines after they crashed. The cops discussing dinner plans like it's just an everyday kind of day for them, where it's like the worst day of his life. And I love that level of detail because that lets you know just how deeply these images are like scorched into his memory. But Sean responds by asking whether or not Jimmy is going to Jimmy him, which is when Jimmy does these outside of the box therapy ideas that result in women pushing their husband off of a cliff or him getting his teeth knocked out. This ties in with Jimmy's guilt over Grace's imprisonment because he sees himself as responsible for not giving more traditional therapeutic advice. Paul advises him to stop jimmying people, but Alice says that when he was at his worst after Tia's death and ignoring his pain, he would just come home and like dryly say he was good. He's like, how's the day? He's like, oh, it was good. It was good. And she adds that there was a moment in time that seemed to bring him kind of like out of his funk after his wife died. And he says jimmying in response, to say that, when I started jimmying people, that's when I started to do better. But Paul gives Jimmy some hard truths, saying that everyone tiptoes around him or flat out lies about what they've been doing because he's so fragile and it's not their job to heal him. And he says he's getting too close to Sean. Remember, they're living together and still doing therapy. That's a huge blending of boundaries here. And Paul recommends that Sean no longer be Jimmy's patient. And I absolutely loved how they ended the first episode after this. We see that Sean is now seeing Paul for his therapy. And Paul is also advising Sean to face his trauma. And he says, if you don't face your trauma, it's going to come back to haunt you. And during this therapy session, they intercut scenes of someone arriving to see Jimmy. And it's revealed that the person who killed Jimmy's wife in the drunk driving accident that was played by Brett Goldstein, he's arrived to apologize to Jimmy. And Jimmy completely loses his shit at this guy. Like, not facing his trauma at all, but instead running from it. Then he returns home, and then he says his day was good in the same manner that Alice had said earlier that he did when he was at his lowest. So I love a good callback. So that lets us know that he had regressed with his progress, and it also let us know that Alice noticed it. So that was a nice little way, that little previous story letting us know, like, oh shit, an interaction that on paper is just like, how is your day good, is like the worst fucking possible interaction that Alice could have had at that time. So I thought that was a really well done closing to that episode. Jimmy's other arc, which we see primarily in the second episode, revolves around his relationship with Gabby. They've continued to see each other, and Gabby is starting to want more than just being fuck buddies, but she knows that Jimmy can never really get past his wife. And you can tell that she really likes him because she tries to slide in this little hint of like, well, it would be different if there were real feelings, like hoping that Jimmy's going to go, well, there is. But Jimmy says he's fine. He's like, I'm fine with stopping. If you don't want to do it anymore, cool. You having fun? That's all right. But then he shows up at her house, clearly trying to get laid. He's got on his fuck panties. And Gabby calls him out for knowing that she had caught feelings for him, but continuing to see her anyway. And I like this angle, too, because this is just another way that Jimmy is running from his trauma. Like, he's trying to escape it, by sleeping with his wife's best friend, and he's willing to do it at the expense of her mental health, which is a wild thing to be okay with doing when your job is to be a therapist. And my enjoyment of these arcs that they set up in the first 2 episodes is why I found episode 3 to actually be a little bit disappointing. Aside from Gabby giving Jimmy shit over continuing to sleep with her, both of those storylines are abandoned from the Jimmy side of things and replaced with an incredibly forced issue between him and Brian. Like, I'm watching episode 3, like, they're putting Jimmy and Brian's friendship on the brink of collapse because he didn't tell him he was fucking Gabby. Like, this really feels like a stretch. And we didn't even need them to force an issue between Jimmy and Brian. Like, Jimmy's got plenty of issues. Like, you didn't need to add another one for no reason and then add it so weakly. As in weekly with an A. This just feels like a strange and unnecessary diversion from the things that I wanted to see Jimmy working through. Like the situation with Lewis, who is... Oh, well, you're probably like, Lewis, who the fuck is that? That's Bray Goldstein's character, who it feels like the show has gone out of its way to not name. Like, I had to look it up, and I think that's weird, but I'm wondering if that's like some sort of big reveal they're saving for later. I don't know why, but I really don't think they've said his name. But anyway, last thing about Jimmy. I need the thing with Grace and Donnie. I need that to be done now. That was never an interesting angle. And you got your cute scene in episode 3 of like Brian reading the character witness statements. Like, can we be done with that angle now? Like, it's not a great arc, and it was responsible, along with the Brian friendship arc, for me seeing nothing regarding Jimmy dealing with Lewis in episode 3. Moving on, Paul, played by the legendary Harrison Ford, returns for this season as well. And while his character arc isn't quite as compelling as Jimmy's, it's still pretty good. Paul's now dating his doctor. Again, none of these therapists give a fuck about boundaries, while unironically telling Jimmy that he struggles with boundaries. But her name's Julie, if you don't recall, and they dance together every morning, and it's cute because it's supposed to help with his Parkinson's. You know, I guess it's to help get the blood flowing early. I don't know the science behind it, but it's supposed to help with his Parkinson's. Help keep him mobile, I guess. Now, to be clear, before people hop in the comments purposely misconstruing my words, I'm not making the case that Paul should not date his doctor. I'm making the case he can't tell someone else they need to do better with boundaries when he's dating his physician. So just so we're clear, I'm not saying he should date the doctor. I'm just saying he's a hypocrite. But then he breaks things off with Julie in the first episode, but not because dating his doctor goes against his own advice or his own moral position, but because Gabby called them roomies with Bennies, and he got his feelings about that. I'm like, man, talk about the wrong reason to do what you believe is the right thing, but which is actually the wrong thing. Like you're too old to be having these boundaries. Like, just date your doctor. It's fine. But Paul and Julie, they later say that they love each other, and then they react as if that's a bad thing. And I kind of like the nuance there. Like, on one hand, it's like, shit, you're like, oh, I'm sorry, Harrison Ford, even though I know you're not watching this. You old as fuck, and now you found someone to spend your last little bit of time with. And she's pretty hot, too. Like, let's not get it twisted. But on the other hand, that's a lot of investment to have in someone, knowing that Parkinson's is coming and that Paul is no spring chicken. So it's like, yeah, I love you, but it's like, fuck, we're destined now for some difficult times, and we're destined for them fairly soon. Like, it's a small time frame here that we're gonna be working in. So I kind of see the we love each other, but shit, kind of feeling. This season, Paul's advice and then how he behaves in his personal life, they seem to constantly be at odds with one another. In episode 2, Paul has to drop a patient in order to take on Sean, and he drops someone that he actually likes and is bonded with, this guy named Ray. And technically, this is the right thing to do. He said Ray was cool. Like, he didn't even need therapy no more. He was basically just paying Paul to, like, just shoot the shit with his buddy. But when Ray is like, we can still, like, Ray takes the breakup fairly well, but he's like, we can still hang out outside of the office, right? Outside of therapy sessions, right? And Paul says it wouldn't be appropriate and that he keeps his personal and professional life separate. I'm just like, man, what the fuck is you talking about? We're just like, again, okay, maybe that's technically the right thing to do, but you didn't have to do all that, man. Like, you did something you didn't have to do and didn't want to do because you want to adhere to a rule that doesn't need to be so forcefully and steadfastly applied like this. But again, I like where this arc is going, and Paul does eventually do the right thing for the right reasons. Jimmy's on the phone with Paul, and he asks him for credit whenever he gives Paul some good advice, and Paul brushes him off just like, yeah, that ain't never gonna happen. as he arrives at the bar to meet up with Ray outside of the therapy sessions, which is what Jimmy actually advised him to do. So I thought that was cool. And it's comforting, and it makes Paul more relatable to not have him be that old man who is so wise that he gives all this sage advice and makes all the right decisions. Like, I like that he still makes mistakes, and he's still learning, and he's still growing too, but he's still being loyal to being an old man by not giving Jimmy an inch by saying that he was right. Like, I took your advice. Like, no, I'm not even going to give him all that. Then in episode 3, he does learn his lesson and take his own advice, and he gets himself a new physician. So Julie doesn't have to be his doctor and his girlfriend. And I loved how this moment came to be, too, with us learning that Julie's husband has dementia, which puts a lot of guilt on Paul because now she's going to have to transition from taking care of somebody with dementia to taking care of somebody with Parkinson's. And what I didn't like and thought was strange was how Paul confided in Derek, of all people, in that moment. Like, I thought that was kind of weird. Like, I didn't dislike it or anything like that. I just thought it was a weird decision. Like, how many scenes have those two had together? Like, why would Paul be comfortable telling his personal business to Derek? And my only guess is that it's easier for him to share with somebody he doesn't really care about, like he does, Jimmy and Gabby. But then you end up with a scene that's not really all that great, where Paul spills his guts about everything going on, and Derek's just like, remove the Parkinson's. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, cool, I'll remove the Parkinson's. Derek didn't say that. That's what Paul said. At this point, you could probably kind of tell that episode 3 didn't really carry the momentum that I thought the show had after the first 2 episodes, but we're going to keep on moving. I'm not going to get to every character arc that they kicked off in these first 2 episodes, but I do want to talk about one that I don't like, and that's the one with Liz. Like I mentioned earlier, Gabby is grappling with her fuck buddy relationship with Jimmy, and Liz has been helping her out. Well, she's from Liz's perspective, she's been helping her out. I don't see help. That's not what I'm seeing. But a lot of these scenes with Liz and Gabby, they weren't great for the Liz character, in my opinion. Like, Liz is coming off way more intrusive and obnoxious this season. I don't really care for that. And yeah, I think it's to show how she's struggling with not having someone to mother anymore. That, what's it called, empty house syndrome or whatever. But that doesn't make her behavior any less irritating. Like, the way she interrupted Gabby's classroom in episode 1 was like, it was both annoying and it felt like too much toward implausibility. Like, any halfway decent person is just gonna like let themselves be seen, wave, and they're just gonna stand and wait awkwardly or wait for a break or whatever at the end of the class. Not just interrupt like that. And then she, like the next scene, she like kicks a student out who wanted to come have like office hours, kind of a visit with Gabby. And that felt like too much too. Like, no one would do that, and no one would allow that to happen. Like, Gabby wouldn't be like, yeah, that's fine. You can kick out my student so you can come over here and chastise me about who I fuck. Like, that's not how people prioritize. Like, I think they were going for funny in that scene or in those scenes, but all I got of it was that Liz is just a selfish asshole who acts like she wants to help other people, but she's really only doing it for herself. And admittedly, Gabby suggests that exact dynamic may be at play for her in episode 3. Like, Liz then takes that valuable advice and then turns around and sells her share of Sean's food truck to Sean's dad without even asking Sean what he wanted to do. Like, that's how you know that Liz was doing that for herself, so she could feel good about herself rather than doing something that she felt was for Sean's benefit. And I see the lesson, right? I see the direction for Liz's character. She's just flat out pretty annoying right now. And I really liked Liz last season, but I'm sure she's going to become a little bit more tolerable. Then later in episode 1, Liz, Derek, and Brian go to unpack Gabby's house. And I know that's Liz's way of apologizing, but she doesn't. And then Gabby is the one who apologizes in that scene. And it's not Gabby who needed to apologize. Gabby didn't do nothing. She kicked Liz out of her office for being a fucking asshole. Like, that's not... You don't have to apologize for that, especially when you didn't get one first. Don't be cleaning up my house and then just be like, yeah, I'm not going to actually apologize. Just accept this act as an apology. Like, no, you better throw the apology onto that motherfucker. But the whole thing with Liz, Sean, and the food blogger in episode 2, I wasn't really into that either. Like, couple that with Liz selling her shares in the truck without asking Sean about how he felt about it. It's just been a rough start for the Liz character in these first 3 episodes, if we're talking in terms of likability. Speaking of Liz's poor decision-making, I loved how Sean and Gabby pointed out how weird it was that Liz and Derek were cool with their son making out with Summer, that's Alice's friend, like right in front of them on the couch. And I didn't even really like that either. Like, again, they were going for funny, but my immediate reaction was like a disgusted version of the way Sean and Gabby reacted. Like, not... Like, they're like, oh my God, like white people let their kids do anything. And I was like, oh my God, white people let their kids do anything. Like, so it's like totally different, totally different reactions. Even though they're the same words. And the last arc I want to spend any sort of significant time talking about is Alice. It looks like her sole arc this season is going to revolve around Lewis, which is great. But after these first 3 episodes, her arc is leaving a lot to be desired as well. Like, she doesn't get a ton to do in these first 2 episodes, aside from talk with Paul regarding her how she feels about Lewis coming into her life. But she does get a couple of moments in episode 3. But episode 2 ends with her sitting outside of Lewis's house, which immediately prompted the question for me of, how the fuck did she get his address? I suppose she could maybe like know his name and Google the address, but why would she just do that just now? Like, if you had all this smoke for this dude all this time, why would you have been Googled his name and address and sat out front of his house? And why wouldn't they tell us that she had been doing that? Like, that's an important fucking detail, right? And then in episode 3, she lets Paul read the letter that she wrote to Lewis, and Paul makes her promise not to visit him again, which of course meant that she would be doing precisely that with probably in the next 10-15 minutes. And then that of course prompted a similar question to the one I had earlier, which is, how the fuck did she find out where he works? Like, he even says in the scene, like, I just started working here. And I'm not saying like these are impossible things to find or anything like that. I'm saying that the show is played out like his appearance in their life was like completely out of the blue. Like they moved on from him and he just popped up. It's like, oh shit, it's the guy that killed mom. So to like then pop up at his house, at his job, like that requires a level of research that I don't think you can just leave on the cutting room floor. Like I very much was like, whoa, how'd she find out where you live at already? Like apparently he just entered your life like yesterday. Like I don't know, man. Like she could know his name, I guess, but I don't know. Again, I don't feel like that's a detail you can leave out. And the moments are lessened when you don't do the little things to make them work. And seeing her obsess over finding him is something I think that's worth filming and is worth showing that character do and showing that character deal with. But then, like I said, she shows up at his job and he starts to apologize and she screams at him in the same way that Jimmy did. And again, I get it. They responded in the same way. They're handling this the same way. Their father-daughter, not well. I truly get it. But that's 2 episodes of wasted time with Brett Goldstein's character now. It's fine to have the Jimmy situation go that way, but to have Alice do the exact same thing after her scene had some build-up, whereas compared to Jimmy's scene, Lewis just appeared out of nowhere, it was just really disappointing to just have, again, a entirely fruitless scene between Lewis and either Jimmy or Alice. And I've been saying this whole time how the move to introduce this character is a masterwork. Well, not this whole time, it's just the start of the video. So do something with it now. Like it is a masterstroke. It's a great idea. You can get some great scenes. You've wasted 2 of them. Like let's get some popping now. Sean hasn't gotten shit to do yet this season, which is wild since he was a major focal point in season 1. He's had a couple of, I don't want to revisit my time in the military scenes and scenes working in his food truck. That's about it. He explodes on Liz at the end of episode 3, pause. But I'm honestly not that interested in that yet because every scene with Sean just seems to be setting up his issues. Like we can start like playing out some of that stuff now. Like let's start doing something with Sean. Like he ditched the one military friend who always wanted to reminisce. He didn't want to meet with the food blogger because he didn't want to be seen as a veteran who had a food truck. He doesn't want to work with his dad at the food truck. Cool. So now that I've had 3 episodes of learning what he don't want to do, can we move forward now and see what the plan is for his character for this season? Like that'd be great. Sweet. So that's all I got. A fairly supersized video, I know, but I got to find the time to work on these videos when I can. And I've had a pretty hectic couple of weeks. Like I said, I think there's a promising start and there's a lot to like so far, but it's still, it's not perfect. After 3 episodes, it feels like we're kind of dragging our feet on getting some of these character arcs moving. So I'd like to see some shit really happening in episode 4, but I do like everything that they have been setting up. So let me know what you thought about these first 3 episodes in the comments. And until next week, peace.